UCLA, I taught at Berkeley. I've had a whole series of government jobs over the years. I was actually state public health officer for about a year and a half, and I had the highest job in environmental health in the United States as head of the Center for Environmental Health at CDC. And I'll tell you about the long, strange trip I've been on. But the class I teach, I have the students do presentations, and one day, I always pair them up. I always have a public health student partnered with either a planning student or a law student or someone else, because I want them to get to know someone else. So one of the presentations was up at Berkeley, and one of the presentations was by a young woman, Anglo, and a young Hispanic woman. They both lived in the Mission, and they were going to do a presentation on the built environment and health. They came in and knocked our socks off. And the first young lady did a presentation on the billboards in the Mission in San Francisco. One billboard after another. Go gamble, drink hard liquor, buy these cigarettes. Every single one of them was about doing something that impairs your well-being. And then she used a word that was really profound for me. She said, this is about disempowerment. All of this stuff that's coming into our community is about disempowering us. And then the young Latina began to speak, and she was showing the murals of the Mission. And every one of them was about empowerment. And every one of them brought joy into that community and reinforced that community's power. And I've never been able to look either at a billboard or another sign ever since without really understanding these issues differently. I'm going to assert that our society is facing huge problems, and I tend to look at it at a big level. I apologize that I'm not much at the community level, but I'm going to start there. And that we are faced with a whole series of problems that you know in your family, if you've got a whole series of problems and you come up with a solution that fixes all those problems. Dad gets a good job, or a good market moves next door, or the farmer's market opens. It solves a bunch of problems, not just one. And I love the title. I just got a new PowerPoint thing, and I haven't had to clean up the pictures yet, so I apologize for not cleaning this one up. I love the title, Reimagine Empty Space. When we get down the street, do we ever think to ourselves, everything I am looking at was in someone's mind at some point. It was in someone's imagination. The height of the ceiling, the size of the windows, the design of those cars, everything starts out in our heads. And if we don't get our heads clear, then our physical spaces never follow our heads. We are facing a series of challenges in our society. Their health challenges, their economic challenges, and their environmental challenges. We've got to come up with solutions that can fix all of them at once rather than doing it separately. At the university, you have all these eggheads running around. You have thousands of people who specialize in tiny, tiny little things, and it's great, but we're not going to solve 21st century challenges by forever being brand new, by forever focusing down on the little grains of sand. We're facing a perfect storm, and there's a health and social storm. I actually went wandering into the health clinic first, as I was going along, and I was seeing folks in the waiting area, and I was thinking, and I am a pediatrician, that the first thing they do when you take your child to the pediatrician is they do the height and weight, and they plot it out in this graph. And what you want is, if your child's 70th percentile for height, you want your child to be 70th percentile for weight. You don't want your child to be 30th percentile for height and 90th percentile for weight. And so here's a typical child we're seeing in America today. A child comes in, he's 10 years old, he's 50th percentile for height, he's 95th percentile for weight. His blood pressure is too high, his blood sugar is too high, he's showing signs of depression, and his cholesterol is too high. So a good doctor would say, well, no soft drinks in the house, don't buy them, get them out of the house. Don't have a TV in the bedroom. Kids should not have screens in the bedroom. It's a recipe for overweight. You get the child to join some various programs at school that can get more activity. But what happens if the child's poor and all the programs are after school and the child has to get on the bus or has to go right away? It's very hard for children who are disadvantaged to be in these activities. So 2 months later, the child goes back to the doctor, and has he lost any weight? No. Despite all the good advice, it's very hard to change. And this is really what we're talking about. If you want to change people, particularly populations, you've got to change their environment. You can't simply wag your finger at them and say, you need to do this. Little boy can't change the food at school. He really can't stay after school. He's got no time for exercise. Maybe mom's afraid to have him go out after school because of the things that Damon was talking about. And there's no place to walk. And 2 months after that, he's on 4 different medicines. And I see this over and over again. We create air pollution and we treat it with a half dozen different medicines rather than really treating the prevention end of this. And we create obesity and lack of physical activity, and we treat it with medicines. We don't treat it. And these medicines are expensive. You easily can imagine this being $400 a month for this little family. The environment that we have imagined in America in the 20th century is rigged against our children. It's actually rigged against the healthcare system, who sit there at the end of the disease pipeline thinking we're going to fix up the casualties of a physical environment and economic environment that we have set up. When I was a young doctor, we thought that 7% of all the money in the United States going to medical care was a huge amount of money. 7% of all the money in the United States going to medical care? What is it now? It is 17%. Are you getting your money's worth? We, by the way, now spend more money. We spend $1.7 trillion in the United States on drugs and medicines. These are legal drugs, prescribed drugs. We spend 1.3 on food. Has there ever been a population in the history of the world that spends more money on medicine than they do on food? And how many of you can remember an old grocery store that closed and a pharmacy was put in its place? And I think it's a disgrace, by the way, for pharmacies to either sell cigarettes or alcohol. If they're supposed to be health centers, they ought to be health centers. So we must be really healthy, right? All that money, 17% of all the money? Well, that's just basically worldwide, we're number 49 for life expectancy. We're not as good as Slovenia, despite the fact that we're spending like $2 trillion a year on medical care. I don't let my students call it health care, because we're not really doing health, we're doing medical care. Americans have gained 30 years in the last century in our lifespans. 30 years, that's great. We're living a lot longer than our great-grandparents and our grandparents. How many of those additional years do you think came from medical care?
Maybe 5.
You're good. Exactly right. 5 years came from medical care. 25 years came from somewhere else. And as a pediatrician, I'll tell you, a good part of that, or a substantial part, is immunization. Immunization really does work. It's a wonderful investment. Where else did it come from? The big ones were, pardon me? The big improvements were safer and cleaner water, air quality improvements, job safety, in prevention programs that we put in place. We spend next to nothing on prevention, and yet 25 of the 30 years of improvement came from that. The other 5 years are where we spend $1.7 trillion. So, I said I was at CDC in Atlanta, the Centers for Disease Control, for about 10 years on a different stint. I have to tell you, I was working in Berkeley, and I told my wife one day we were moving to Atlanta, Georgia, because I was going to take this great job. And we got to Atlanta with 3 little boys on an August day. It was about 100 degrees, 100% humidity, and my sons decided I was the stupidest man in the whole world. Just because of the economic class I'm in, we couldn't afford private school. We wanted our kids to be in the best public school we could find. And we got out the book and we found the best public school system we could find. It turned out to be one of these suburbs north of Atlanta. I didn't really like it, but we bought a house there. and suddenly discovered there wasn't a sidewalk within 7 miles of where we lived. Our boys went to 3 different schools, and if they did any kind of after-school activity, my wife and I had an opportunity at the end of every single day of work to get on the phone and argue about who was going to pick up the boys, trying to get across Atlanta as we juggled our life. And it was really a problem because we had no support systems in Atlanta the way we did with family in Northern California. So that was headquarters, and one day the head of CDC called us all in and said, I'm doing a paper for the Journal of the American Medical Association. It's going to be about the big threats to health in the 21st century. Okay, so the head of the Chronic Disease Center said the big threat to health is obesity and diabetes. The guy doing all the demography is saying it's the population pressure. It's going to be 600 million by the end of it. The injury guy is saying the leading cause of years of life lost in America is injuries. And I'm thinking, oh man, there's endocrine disruptors, there's chemicals in our bodies, there's global climate change. I can really depress you if you let me go on. And I'm driving down Buford Highway, which is where my office is located, and I look over to the right side. This is the road, it's 7 lanes wide. There's actually a real U.S. highway about a mile parallel to it. And cars drive at 65 miles an hour. Georgia has the highest pedestrian death rate, one of the highest in the whole United States. This road has the highest pedestrian death rate in Georgia. And it's lined with the homes of poor people, 2 and 3 stories high, both sides of the road. And the police are giving people tickets because they're jaywalking. And you wouldn't want to jaywalk, but it's 2 miles on a hot day between crosswalks and intersections, and you've got to get a bus going downtown in the morning and a bus going out in the evening. Of course, you're jaywalking. So I'm rushing. I'm late, of course, and I'm going to work, and I was at the headquarters, and I'm driving down the road, and I look over to the right side, and here's a woman struggling on this hot day with a plastic shopping bag, one in each hand. And it's really hot out, and she's really bent over with osteoporosis. She's clearly in her 60s or 70s, and she's having a hard day. And I want to stop and give her a ride, but men don't give women rides in the United States. It's just the way it is. And I was late, and I didn't do it. And I go to this meeting, everybody's talking great big things, and I'm thinking, if that poor woman collapsed, the cause of death would be heat stroke. And if she were killed by a truck going by, the cause of death would be motor vehicle trauma. But what was the real cause of death if she were killed by a truck going by? You know, they should be writing motor vehicle trauma, absence of sidewalks, poor urban planning, failed political leadership. And so what I'm trying to get here, and this is really my career, is that public health is about the causes of death. And that's really what you're talking about. That's what Damon's talking about. What are the causes that are causing these things? And we're very good as Americans to go, right, well, he did it, and we don't go to the next set of causes. And one of the reasons is it's inherently political. You upset people when you start moving upstream, and you have to be political at some point. We have built about 3 million of these every year. What is the message of this particular building? What's the most important thing in that person's life? The car, yeah. You know, we have these human beings who are appendages to their vehicles. They're just sort of glommed onto the vehicle. And think about imagining healthy places. It looks healthy when ads. By the way, they always name these places like Brookline or Willow Horse Farm or something else. And it's all these desperately boring places that if you talk to any teenager, they will reassure you these places are desperately boring. Here's reimagining public spaces. By the fact that we have built America for cars and not for people. And by the way, we actually had good transit in this city. We ripped it all up because General Motors didn't want us riding around in transit. They wanted us riding around in their cars. They were partnering with Esso and a couple of the big oil companies and others to do it. We have paved over 60,000 square miles of the United States. That's an area the equivalent of the state of Georgia. Paving is not good for your health. What is he talking about? Sure, if I fall down on my face, paving's not good for my health. But when it rains, that stuff doesn't go into the water doesn't go into the ground. You get flooding. And you all know what happens to the river when we get a heavy rain. It all rushes down into the ocean. What happens on a hot day? Would you rather be in a green park, or would you rather be on a blacktop road on a hot, sunny day? You know that one is much harder than the next. We've invested enormous amounts of money into road infrastructure. These things, this is called the California State Flower. They cost about billions, sometimes $2 to $3 billion at a time. And unfortunately, after about 5 to 8 years, they don't work. Does anyone think that adding a lane to the 405 is going to really reduce congestion 5 years from now? The only thing you could do with any of our major highways or freeways is run high-speed rail up the middle the way they've done in many other cities. Then you reduce congestion. When people see that train whipping by as you're sitting there, we've tripled the amount of miles we drive in one generation. So we have 3 times as many drivers, and we're all driving 3 times as much. Ever look at the pictures of Los Angeles from 1960 or 55 when Disneyland opened? You see an occasional big fat Chevrolet or something going down the road, and there no one's moving. This is, actually, I'm sorry I skipped that. This is, I'm just going to skip it, but there's an important point here. One of the things I tell my students is the built environment is social policy in concrete. What does that mean? If you have a social policy that says, in Northwest Atlanta, we don't want black people from downtown Atlanta. So we're not going to have the MARTA system come up to where Newt Gingrich is from, that's Cherokee County and East County. And they literally excluded the rapid transit system from northeastern Atlanta. And they build bigger and bigger roads. The only justice in this is it doesn't work. Eventually, they will eventually have to do this. But their social policy was they wanted to exclude, and I actually heard people say MARTA stands for Moving African Americans Rapidly Through Atlanta. It was, the social policy is we don't want these folks here, but then once the concrete is there, the concrete goes right back and shapes the social policy. So you've got a bunch of children that grow up never seeing anybody any different from themselves because you've now excluded populations. It's an ugly slide, but all it says basically is if you look at the years of life lost in America, injuries are the biggest of all, particularly car crashes. It's not the number of deaths, but the years of life lost. Between ages, and David knows this, between ages 3 and 33, trauma, particularly car trauma, but other causes of death, homicide as well, are the leading causes of death in America. Violence and trauma are the big. So, who's more likely, if we ask Newt Gingrich this, he'll give us an answer, who's more likely to die in a pool of blood? Someone living in a suburban city in America, or someone living in a more urban area? I know Oakland better. If someone lives in downtown Oakland versus someone who lives way out in the burbs, who's more likely to die in a pool of blood? It's the suburbanite. Every time you drive 77 miles, you have bought a 1 in a million lottery ticket for death. So when you drive to the Bay Area, that's about 5 to 6 lottery tickets. So you have people who are commuting 77 miles, buying 2 lottery tickets a day to die, 1 in a million lottery tickets to die, worried about living downtown because someone might knock me over the head. If you want to make places safer, you create a diverse population with lots of working people because they don't, creates the stability that you need. This basically is just proof that if you take down all the trees and you make things bare, it gets hot. Why would hot be a health issue? Obviously, you get stressed in the heat. There's another reason hot is a health issue. 2 of them. One is, thank you, you get more ozone formation, so you get more air pollution when it gets hot, and you get more, the power plants run more. So I have been guilty of, don't look at me, just pay no attention to the man behind the curtain. I'm going to stay with this one. the solutions. I'm going on too much. Terrible. Actually, let me show you these slides. So this is U.S. income between 1949 and 1979. Looks pretty good. Everybody's income doubled. There's U.S. income before taxes. Since Ronald Reagan became president, 1979 and 2003. Looks like the top 5% is doing pretty well. Want to see what happens to after-tax income? What do you think? And if you saw Michael Moore's article about when people are saying America's broke, he said we're not broke. The top 400 people own as much as the bottom 50% of our population. So economic justice is a health issue as well. Actually, these are important ones. Who bears the brunt of not having decent transportation? Poor people spend far more of their income on getting to and from work than people that are more well off. Costly transportation is a social justice issue. And having to own a car is basically throwing $10,000 a year away. Oh, I'm sorry. I just want to get to some solutions. So, here's some solutions. This is a picture of me as a Secret Service man protecting. And the point of this one was that we ought to have price supports for food that's good for us. In America, we spend $14 billion a year supporting 6 different commodities that are bad for us and make us fat. We spend nothing on supporting community gardens and healthy food that makes us healthy. Every child, David, every child in the neighborhood needs to know that if you eat food spelled backwards, you become a doofus. We need to tax high fructose corn sugar or all sweeteners. A penny a teaspoon would raise almost $20 billion a year nationally, about $2 billion a year in California. Let's spend it on healthy food in schools. Let's spend it on school gardens. Let's spend it on farmers markets. Let's spend it on well-designed. Let's spend it on safe routes to schools. Let's spend it on nutrition education for the kids and for the students. And let's really spend it where it's going to do some good. And let's make it easier for people to walk. I want to. Because if we do all these things, I have to show this one. Any of you have ever seen these stencils painted where it says, and maybe you've done it as a community project? Well, I think we ought to get a bunch of new stencils, and we ought to paint this all over Los Angeles.
Before you know it, you'll be covered in graffiti.
There is a big pushback against bicycle rules going on. There are people actually claiming that you have a right to drive. So suddenly, I guess, if you're part of the 30% of the people in America that don't drive because you're too old, too young, disabled, or too poor, you have no rights, and only drivers have rights in the way we've set up America to this point. I'm going to stop this slide now. I think that this urban agriculture is the future of America. It is nonsense that we're eating grapes from Chile and citrus from somewhere in Central America when this was the leading agricultural county. You are in the leading agricultural county in the United States in 1945. And instead of planting food, we began to plant cement and houses, one-story houses. People say they don't like density. People love density, but it's good quality density. They actually go to places where they're around other people. If it's safe, if it's clean, if it's pleasant, if it's culturally appealing, if Damon is performing. So, I'm going to say with that. Every school ought to have a garden. Kids need to know where food comes from. And they say that kids won't eat Swiss chard or other things, but they do if they actually grow it themselves. And here we go. So our child starts to walk or bike to school 4 days a week. He saves 1,200 miles on the car, 64 gallons of gasoline, $700. He burns off that one walk 4 days a week, about 40,000 calories a year, 11 pounds of body fat. Goes back to the doctor after 2 years. He's grown a couple inches, 4 inches. His weight's down now to 110, so he's pretty good, 50% healthy, 50% his blood pressure drops, his blood sugar drops, his cholesterol drops, his energy and mood is better. He has a girlfriend and he lives happily ever after. Be engaged and have safe and healthy physical activity.